The world of motorsport has been hit by numerous tragedies over the years. It's a dangerous sport made as safe as possible, but on a spring day in Germany in 1968, Scotland lost one of her own, and his death shocked the world. The Hockenheim circuit was the venue when Berkshire's Jim Clark sat in his Formula 2 car on the grid, but it would be his last race. At around 150 miles per hour, his White Lotus Cosworth skidded off the track, somersaulted, and smashed into trees surrounding the circuit, the debris scattering around. News of the incident was relayed to the crowds over loudspeaker that the 32-year-old Scottish farmer had been in a crash, and there was an audible gasp as the crowd rose to its feet in horror. All the flags were lowered to half-mast as news came in that he was dead. No one of the 80,000-strong crowd saw the incident as it happened away from their line of sight, and it was only 2 hours later they heard the news of his death. The reasons the officials kept it quiet was they didn't want to panic, and the race was eventually won by Jean-Pierre Beltoise of France. Jim Clark was born on 4th March 1936, son of sheep farmer James Clark and his wife Helen, the youngest of 5 and the only son. When he was 6, the family moved from Fife to Eddington Mains Farm near Dunston, Berkshire. As a youngster, he loved driving the tractor on the farm, but it was at the Crimond course of Aberdeen and District Motor Club near Peterhead he drove his first race. This was on 16th June 1956. He was a natural talent who loved to drive, and it was just something he enjoyed doing when he wasn't working on his farm. 2 years later, he was driving for the Border Reivers, and in 1958 came to the attention of Lotus owner Colin Chapman when Clark came second to him at Brands Hatch. He remained with the team until his death. It was one of the most successful partnerships in motorsport. He drove for Lotus Ford in March 1960 at Goodwood, where he won. On 6 June 1960, he made his F1 debut at the Dutch Grand Prix, although was forced to retire. At the Italian Grand Prix in 1961, Clark collided with Ferrari's Wolfgang von Trips. Von Trips was thrown from his airborne car, which smashed into spectators, killing 15 of them, and Von Trips himself. In 1962, he won his first Grand Prix at Belgium, and the following year Clark won his first Grand Prix championship in the Lotus 25, winning 7 out of 10 races, and winning Lotus the Constructors' Championship. 1963 also saw him enter his first Indianapolis 500, finishing second. He went on to win the Indy 500 in 1965. He also won his second F1 championship that year. In 1964, as in 1962, he came very close to winning the F1 title again, but like 1962, an oil leak put paid to this. However, he was awarded an OBE for services to motorsport that year by Queen Elizabeth II. 1966 saw issues with the Lotus cars, but in 1967, Lotus began using the new Ford Cosworth engine, and Clark in the Lotus 49 won the Dutch Grand Prix, then the British, the US, and the Mexican Grand Prix. In January 1968, he won the South African Grand Prix, having led from the start, and was awarded a special gold star by the British Racing Drivers Club. In all, he won a record 25 F1 races, was on the podium 32 times, had 33 pole positions, and had the fastest lap 28 times. He also entered the Le Mans in 1959 for 3 consecutive years, with his highest position being third in 1960. Give him a car, and he'd drive it. Clark remained a bachelor and lived outside the UK for tax purposes, taking up residency in Bermuda, then Paris, and finally Switzerland. But he returned to Scotland as often as he could, and was due back the weekend following his untimely death. The race in which he died was part of the unofficial European Formula 2 Championship, and was the first in a series of 11 for the Deutschland Trophy, and it was Clark's first race at the Hockenheim circuit. There had been a rain shower that morning, and the circuit still had some wet patches when the race started. Before the race, Clark had been mingling with guests on the grid and his team. He looked relaxed as he prepared himself before getting in the car and getting the job done. It was during the 5th lap that officials noticed something was wrong, as he'd not passed the timekeeper on the start of the grid. At the time of the crash, Clark was in 8th place, but it was noticed by an official that he was unhappy. Fighting to keep the car on the track, he'd been travelling fast by the edge of the grass safety strip, then it flipped 3 or 4 times before hitting the tree. His car was a write-off, and according to one official, had been smashed into 100 pieces. Clark most likely died instantly. He'd broken his neck and fractured his skull, and when he arrived at hospital, he was officially pronounced dead. No other cars were nearby when the incident happened, and his teammate Graham Hill had retired his car after the 20th lap. Although clearly upset, he returned to the scene of the crash, looking through the debris for answers. Immediately afterwards, an investigation was launched, and it was found that there was no evidence of pre-impact failures on the car. The pieces of debris found after the crash had come off due to its impact, and not before. But Lotus boss Chapman was critical of the circuit itself. He said that if barriers had been installed, Clark could possibly have survived. He also conceded that it was absolutely impossible to know what had caused it. However, it turned out to be a deflated rear tyre that was the cause. Being away from the farm, Clark's parents didn't hear the news until it was given to them as they drove up to their home. His father, James, said racing was his life, but that his mother never wanted him to take it up as a career. Neither did he particularly, but they accepted that he loved it and were proud of his achievements over the years. His mother was devastated by the loss of her son. The day following the crash, Clark was brought back to Scotland and was buried on Wednesday 10th April at Chirnside. Hundreds of mourners lined the streets as the funeral cortege made its way to Chirnside Parish Church. People from Duns, the place where he'd been given the freedom of the borough in 1965, in honour of him winning 2 world championships, came in their droves. His teammate, Hill, Colin Chapman, the head of Lotus, and Jackie Stewart, amongst others in the world of motorsport, said their goodbyes at the church. The Reverend Gibson both conducted the service, with those attending in complete silence, and he was laid to rest in the kirkyard. First and foremost, he was a farmer, working at Eddington Mains near Chirnside, and this is reflected on his headstone. He once said it was never his intention to become world champion, but he was curious to find out what it was like to drive the car fast, to drive on a certain circuit, to drive a certain type of car. He was well liked by those who knew him, was softly spoken, and wasn't interested in being rich or famous. The quiet, unassuming Clark was home forever. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.